Today, I want to give you my thoughts and opinions on Hyperion. So, what's going on, Average Joes? Today, I'm back and welcome back to another one of my videos. I want to talk about the famous and very hyped up book, Hyperion. But before I get into that, just to give you a brief intro into my channel, if you're new here, I talk about mostly fantasy, sci-fi, a lot of mysteries and thrillers, and the occasional nonfiction books. I also like to do some videos gearing toward Kindle Unlimited and those side of bargain book buying and just saving money that way. I consume books all different ways, whether it's Kindle, physical, audiobooks. I don't discriminate. I don't have any sort of background in English or anything like that. I'm very an on the surface level escapism type of reader. So I'm not one for literary, flowery, those types of poetic writing styles, which kind of alludes into part of my opinions on Hyperion. But that's a brief overview on my channel and what I do here. So please, if you're liking some of these videos, like and subscribe, and I'm going to keep making them. So first off, Hyperion by Dan Simmons is a very well-known book in the sci-fi world, and it has been for several decades, won a bunch of awards. And I know a lot of people have been reading it recently. They did the read along on the Shelf Space Discord, I believe, and a bunch of other channels have been reading them as well. And I've honestly owned this book for about a year and a half. I saw it on a Kindle sale for like $2, and since I've heard of it, I was like, yeah, so why not? I'll get to it eventually. And this was the time. So getting into Hyperion. So the overview of Hyperion and what it is about. So it is in the distant, far off science fiction type book, and this is way after the Earth has already collapsed. They refer to our Earth that we know now as Old Earth. I believe all the natural resources have been used up, and it is a husk of its former self, so it is uninhabitable. Humans have colonized to far worlds and planets, and they have created a new Earth, and terraforming and all these things have happened. I think even Mars, people have been moving on from, and they're spanning the galaxy. So very far off science fiction in the world. And the premise of the story is there's this planet, there's a war going on, I believe, with the regular people and something with Hyperion. And on planet Hyperion, there is this religious following and something known as the Strike, some sort of being, mythological being or super being. Anyway, there's a church that built up around it called the Church of the Strike. And for years, they've been doing pilgrimages to go to the Strike Temple, but nobody comes back. And this is the last time the Strike pilgrimage will happen because of the war that's going on. And there's another faction that's trying to take over Hyperion because of the secrets that this planet have, that their people are going to try and harness the power that the planet has. But the last 7 people have been chosen to go on this pilgrimage to the Strike Temple to try and go meet or find the Strike or whatever. And that's who our characters are of the story. The 7 strangers come together and they tell their stories. And how they tell their stories is once they all get together on their ship, they're talking about going down to the planet, and they're wondering, okay, why can't we just fly straight there? You can't fly straight to the temple. There's restricted airspace or something. You have to go land at a certain point and travel on land. So the journey takes like a week or 2, conveniently, so they all have time to tell their story. And then throughout the phases of the journey down to the planet, whether they're flying down there, then they're going on land to this part, and then to this part, there's like 8 to 12 hours in those traveling sections where they're just like, well, we got nothing else to do. Let's tell our story. So that's the setup. They all have different backgrounds. They don't know each other, I don't think. And they go in order, they draw names, and they tell their story. So the outline of this is that they're basically just making their way to the temple, but it's broken down into 7 different short stories, or 6. Either way, each character has their own short story that they tell from their perspective of who they are and how they are connected to the Strike, and how possibly they were chosen to go on this pilgrimage, because like thousands and thousands of people apply or submit themselves to be selected for the pilgrimage, but only 7 people are. And that is basically the setup of it, and that's pretty much the entire book. This is 100% a prologue book because it is just one large setup to what is going to follow on to the second book, where I guess actual resolution happens. And this is when you get to know the story. So it's very character background type of story, and just leading up to when it happens. So what I liked about it, I do like the format. I think it is very interesting to have each characters tell their story. I think there's times in books where you don't get any information from certain characters. And although if you get all the information about one character, it might seem info dumpy to some people, but I honestly don't mind it, because then once you know that person, you can see things from their perspective, their eyes, their motives, and then you're good to go. So I did like the idea of the format of everybody tells their story and then they get together and go on the journey together. So getting all the persons to tell their story is great. Every single person's perspective and voice was different, was noticeably different from each other. So like how it would be if you tell a story, to where it's not everybody, the literary wise, it's not going to be the same way for each of them. They all were noticeably tonally different. And the premise and the mystery behind it, the intrigue of, okay, how do these people get selected? Why is there a pilgrimage? Why are they going there? What is the strike? What is this war going on? Who are this other faction? There's a lot of intrigue and mystery, and that kind of hooked me. These things kind of hooked me from the beginning and gave me a wonder to go forward. And that is where the good parts kind of stop. I'll have a little bit more others, but now I'm going to kind of get into what I didn't like and a little bit of a rant here and there. I will remain spoiler free for a while, but I will have some specifics, especially each individual story as I go. So speaking of each of them have their own story. They are all in a short story narrative. I don't have any experience with short stories. I know short stories don't read like normal stories, which they honestly leave a lot to be interpreted because they're short. So I don't know if that was a purposeful here, or I would have liked more of a straightforward narrative from each person of how some person would normally tell their story. A lot of the stories went on too long. There's a little bit too much fluff. There's just too much detail that's unnecessary. If you were to ask somebody to tell them their story, they would not go off on this side tangent of something else that doesn't relate to the strike. You're just spinning a long short story of this person. And while you might be think you're adding depth to them, I don't think it applies completely to the story, but also like they wouldn't be telling you that. Like my biggest issue with the short story narrative was that people don't tell stories like this. This is not how people tell stories. If you were to sit, especially sitting around with strangers, you do not. If somebody were to start telling me their story and would have gone off on this stuff, I would have stopped them and be like, "Hey, what does this have to do with anything? Can you just skip to where this relates? Can you just skip to the important parts?" Not to be too rude to them, but like, you're telling me about your third grade teacher or whatever. I don't care. Let's just get to like who you are. So that was kind of the thing. There's some parts were too long. I understand there were definitely some good moments where adding good depth to these characters did work, but sometimes it was just too much and unnecessary. Some of the stories did try too hard to be different, and like different perspectives didn't always work. And to me, so like the priest's tale was told in journal entries. I thought that was great. That was a creative way to do a different spin on it. The consoles, I believe, was like a recording which we listened to or something like that, which again, it's a new spin on it, but everybody else was telling their story, and they're going from like third person to first person to, I don't even know what second person is, but the perspectives are different. I feel like most of them should have been somewhat first person in general, so that you actually get a feeling for them and their eyes, not a third person view, because who's the third person in this? You're being told the story from them. So how are they telling their story from a third person perspective? And then almost like the poet's story almost was too poetic at times. The scholar's story, yeah, I just, there were just times where the voice for each of them were trying to be too different, trying to be too much from what they were. A lot of the things, another thing that, not spoiler stuff, a lot of things are not explained in this book. They are just completely glossed over. I still don't understand the difference between the hegemony and the web. If I were to guess, I feel like the hegemony is like, if you were to put it in today's terms, the hegemony would be like the Congress, and the web might be the United States or something. The hegemony is like a group of people versus the web is more of a geographical location. I have no idea. It was never explained. They're used almost interchangeably, but they are different, and I don't know what the difference was. So that wasn't explained, completely glossed over. Time has no meaning in this. Almost he tries to loop in time here and there of talking about standard Earth years, uh, Hyperion years, standard years, which standard what years, and then just years. And then it's just like he's just throwing years out here and there, here and there. Like everything takes so many years to go, and then there's this whole thing of, okay, when you travel somewhere, you have years of debt or something. Like you have to pay back a certain amount of years. Like it's a contract in order to travel somewhere. You have to work on their ship or something like that. There's not that clear of guidance of like, oh, he has to go here, but he has 3 years of debt or something. Like what? And then it seems like some people aged faster and other people age slower. There is some anti-aging process to where a lot of people are like over 100 years old and they get these injections. It's almost like super sci-fi accelerated Botox, but they get like a blue tinge, I think, to their skin or something like that. And like they were just talking about like, oh, centuries ago I did this, and it's like, how are you, like, are you frozen? Some people get frozen and they get, or something, like sometimes they're frozen, sometimes they're not. They're talking about something that happened 1,000 years ago that they were around for, but now they're here. Hyperion seems to go at a faster time than everything else. Sometimes they use standard Earth years. The time was just inconsistent, did not have any kind of explanation. They just threw years out here and there. You're just meant to go along with it, like, okay, I guess I understand for this. And I think, again, that goes back to the perspective of each narrative. I think they kind of use their own years, but it doesn't line up. Like, I understand having differences between the stories and people using their own, but there still needs to be, we still need to comprehend a little bit. And like, if they're even telling their story to other people, they need to understand, like their audience who they're telling their story to needs to understand too. It seems like there would be a more logical way to always keep it to standard Earth years or go between Hyperion and Earth years. There's no conversion mention of how long a Hyperion year, or I might have missed it, Hyperion years for Earth years, and then any other years that are used that are measured with. So time to me was just completely arbitrary. You're just throwing numbers out and you're just not meant to question. The last thing would be the Farcaster. This one was an issue with me because it's mentioned in the poet's story, which is the third story. He has it in his house. He uses it. And then there's just a brief saying of like, yeah, you can use these and go to other worlds. And it's like your that room's on a different world. It's like, okay, so it's like teleportation. It's not teleportation. What is it? And then there's no mention of it for another like 150 pages to when you get to the dead detective story, when there's actually explained what the heck these Farcaster is. And then it's like, okay, why are you going to mention something way early on and then explain it, 2/3 through the book later on when you're just like, oh, so now I understand what that is. That was an issue of mine. There were times that happened where they would mention something, gloss over it, and then later on, like, oh yeah, I guess I'll sprinkle in some more details of what this is. And then my other issue with the Farcaster system and with time, they're talking about all this, how it takes so long to travel from here and there, but then you have these teleporters that people have in their house. I don't understand why these Farcasters teleporters aren't being used other places. They have a museum full of these Farcasters, and yet these other people traveling on like actual missions have to go and cryo freeze or take super long to go. Like, I don't understand. Like, even if you can't Farcast certain long, you can probably set up a chain along whatever planets you can. Did not make sense. So those things were just like, it seemed like the science fiction, a lot of this in this book was just completely glossed over, and you weren't meant to question it. You're just meant to go along for the ride. And it's like, hey, no, go back to, like, you're supposed to focus on this person's story, not the sci-fi around it. Just go back to the person, think of the person, not the sci-fi around it, just whatever. Another super nitpicky thing that happens later on in the book is they come across this grass field that's like, there's like grass is made of like razors. Like if you walk through the field, you get completely cut up. So they're waiting for a ship, and the ship is wooden that goes along the grass. And at this point, because I'm already annoyed at a lot of things in the story and frustrated, I find nitpicky things to pick out. And this is just one of those examples, I'll completely admit. But like, how does this wooden ship go along this grass, this razor grass? Wouldn't the ship get cut up if it's wood? How does it move? I guess it has sails, but like, how are, like, ship would just crush the grass. Like, the grass isn't going to work like water on a ship. That like, at least just call it a hovercraft if you want. That's all you got to do. Did not make sense. Like, so it's just a lot of stuff like this was just like, yeah, I want this in there because of the imagery of it, and we'll just go on to the next thing. So that was that whole nitpicky stuff, I know, but it was just very confusing. Things were glossed over. I wasn't a fan of that. There's definitely a love for Keats, I guess, who was a poet, and it is very poetic at times. And I think there was just too much of it, and a lot of these references to either philosophers or poets. And I remember even looking in the Discord of the group read, and some people were saying that they're so glad that they've read stuff by Keats and other people so that they get all these references. And I'm just sitting here like, I don't even know who the heck this person is. So it seems like you have to have some sort of formal or familiarization with some of these people to actually understand some of these references and how the writing style is and what he's mentioning, which I don't. So like, this is a sci-fi book, but it's also not, because it has all these other references to it that you kind of almost need to picture it. It almost seems like if you were to take this story and just remove the sci-fi elements, put them in the Wild West or put them in Mongolia or anything like that, people who would love the story would still love it because the characters could still be the same. The wording, the philosophy, the poetry could still be the same. The mission could still be the same. You're just moving the sci-fi elements, and that's just whatever. The sci-fi stuff is just background. It's just there to say it's a sci-fi story, kind of. This definitely borders on the philosophical sci-fi and philosophical and literary sci-fi, which I'm not really a fan of. And the more I read sci-fi, the more I realize, okay, there's like hard sci-fi, there's like action sci-fi, there's philosophical and literary sci-fi, where like those things like this, you could just remove the sci-fi elements and people who love it would probably still love it. But that's not me. That's not my kind of style. I would like more of the actual sci-fi elements incorporated, explained, not just there to, I guess, drive a narrative or just be a background noise. So specifically for each person's story, I guess this would be formally saying spoilers because I'm going to say some of the issues I have with each story. The Priest was a very good one. I think that was, at first, it was kind of boring. I didn't really hold my attention, but once you get into the journal entries and how they are in this village, it was very cool. I did enjoy that a lot. I was very into his story. The only, and I think the Priest is largely a lot of people's favorite. The Priest and I think the Scholar. The only issue I have with this is the end with the cruciform and the other priest that takes it onto the ship. The fact that he has like the original priest, when he tried to leave, he was put in so much pain he passed out, and then it auto navigated his way back. You would think if you get taken away even farther, it would just kill you. Like if your body actually suffers enough pain, you'll go into cardiac arrest and your heart will just stop. That's probably what should have happened. This guy's wearing two of the cruciforms. And to manage that, he takes a regular dose of morphine. Again, you cannot be a functioning human being if you're on morphine and if you're in debilitating pain all the time. I don't understand how this person's even functioning. That just didn't seem, that was another one of those things where I think you're just not supposed to question. Other people had other logical issues with, the cruciform still wants some sort of self-preservation, so it's not going to kill its host. And then like it doesn't like pain, but it wants to inflict pain. And then there's that oxymoron as well. So that was the only thing with the Priest, but largely it was really good. And I think it really did paint a picture for Hyperion and some of the mysticism that's going on there. The general story to me was completely all wrong. I thought it was going to be a lot better. For starters, why would you start a story in the middle of a medieval simulation battle? And then why would you tell people about this digital chick that you hooked up with? Like that, you would not tell people about that. You'd also don't start a story in the middle of some sort of training exercise that did not make any sense and did not fit. Because shortly after that, he actually goes back to his beginning and tells, okay, this is where I'm from. I was an orphan. This is how I got into the military. This is how I got to be an officer. This is how I got to be, the rank that I am. And then he just laid it out. That to me is how a military person, being a military person myself, would lay out their story. It would be logical, efficient, chronological. Boom, boom, boom. This is how it was. This is what I did. You also wouldn't go into detail about this chick that you've been hooking up with in all these simulations and this love affair. And like that, A, it's too personal for anybody to share, to anyone. B, the entire time the general is in their actual now happening, he's stone-faced and giving one-word answers, just like yes, no, just very, very cold. And yet when he starts his story, oh, yeah, let me just tell you about all my feelings and open my hearts up to you. strangers about this girl that I don't even really know about. So his whole story was just wrong to me. It seems like one of those situations where, like, it happened to the priest. After the priest, the one of the guy, the consul found that the priest was withholding information, and he went to them and was like, "Hey, I'm calling you on your bullshit."
Where's the poop, Robin? Excuse me? When I was a kid, I had a dog named Bean. Whenever he made the face that you're making right now, you just knew he pooped somewhere in the house.
You need to tell me about this. And then it's like, okay, he tells him. That's, I feel like, would have been happened to the general. It's like, oh, here's the story, here's all my training stuff, here's how the connections, what it is. And like, he might have mentioned the girl in each of the simulations. Oh, she kept on popping up, she kept on popping up. I feel like somebody should have been like, you're not telling us something, you need to tell us.
Where's the poop, Robin?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Where's the poop, Robin?
There's no poop.
Where's the poop?
Okay.
And then the general probably could have just been like, okay, yeah, I was actually having a love affair with her, da 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 da. That's when, like, it should have been pulled out of him versus just divulging that sort of personal information. The general's story was, to me, was all wrong. The poet's was pretty good. His actually, funny enough, it was actually really funny toward the end when the consul finally told his story, and they said, oh, just like with the priest, my story is tied with somebody else's. And the poet straight up says, you guys suck at telling stories. And I'm like, yes, thank you. The poet made a lot of sense because it's actually chronological order. It makes sense, which I guess, hey, it's a poet, he was a story writer. I guess that makes sense. Maybe Dan Simmons, you're really just trying to do that, show that other people suck at telling stories. I don't know. His was good at times. His went on too long. I mean, book deals, how he's going to write these books and these stories. Like, I know you had to paint a certain struggle to get to tell you where his rock bottom to meet that one king, I forgot his name, but to get to Hyperion in general, like, you gotta pay the road to see how you got there. But there's still a bit too much on book deals and crap like that. And then the whole Farcaster with his, like, it just wasn't explained, it was just glossed over. And I mean, this isn't a problem with the book, but just how dumb he was with money. But that was just whatever. The Scholar, I think the Scholar is going to be a lot of people's favorites. It had definitely had the most feels to it, the most pulling on the heartstrings, the deeper connection to the characters and his situation, and that was very well done. The biggest issue with the Scholar is probably the biggest glaring issue in all of these, and that is Dan Simmons broke his own rules. And by that, I mean, people are telling their stories from their perspective, how they see it, what they did. There is a moment where he tells the story from his daughter's perspective, getting up out of bed from her boyfriend's, going out to the temple, having the lights shut off, getting ambushed by the Shrike or whatever from her perspective. How does he know her perspective? He doesn't. He wasn't there. So how could he be telling them the story from her perspective? He couldn't be. Later on, it's said that they have him and his wife share a dream about an experience that happened. They could have just completely left that her whole part out with her, sprinkled in the dreams, and then those two could have came together eventually, talked about the dream, and could have put the pieces together of what happened. But no, he just went, you know what? I'm just going to tell you exactly what happened in the temple with her, even though the person telling the story would not have known that. That was a huge, huge red flag, and you just broke the rules. And reading that, I'm just like, this does not make sense, Dan. You're just kind of doing what you want to drive this story. And I just think he either wanted people confused to be like, oh, it'll be solved later, or not to question things and just to go along for the ride of these people's stories to get their background. So that was completely just bad to me. The detective, I thought the detective was going to be my favorite story because it came off as very much a noir story. It was first person. She was telling how things were feeling, seeing things through her eyes, how she was going through stuff. And I thought it was going to be the best one, but it was probably the most confusing story out of all of them. This Cybex thing that comes to get her to investigate, I have no idea what the heck it is. Is it an android? Is it not an android? How does it become human if it's part machine? Like, it had one, but it was killed, but now it's still there. All of that stuff completely went over my head. And there was far more explanation into the science in the detective story, like the Farcaster, like that android thing, whatever it was, and some other things. There was actual effort to explain some of the sci-fi elements in the story. Still completely went over my head. The Farcaster made more sense a bit. I just didn't understand why they weren't using them other ways. But the actual android thing, whatever it was, no idea what it is still. Did not make sense to me. Completely glossed over. I just was confused during it. And even the tie-in with how the detective in the strike was just like, I don't know if it was just convenient or what, but it was over my head. And at this point, I was just like, all right, whatever. I'm almost done with this book. Let me just get the consoles over with. And then the console, probably the worst story of them all. Most of it felt pointless to me. And for the majority of the book, I kept on thinking, and I even asked in the Discord, like after past halfway, I was like, why the hell does the console not have a name? It's super pretentious and annoying why he just refers to himself as the console instead of an actual name. And I figured, okay, maybe part of his story, it's going to be some big reveal and it's going to have significance. Not really. It was kind of underwhelming. He plays this recording of, oh, my story is tied to another, plays the recording, and it's of his grandparents or something like that. And it's like, my name's actually this. Oh, all right. Wah wah. Like that wasn't that. You could have just told us their name from before. You still would not know. Like even if it was just the first name, still wouldn't have known the connection. Still don't know who this person is. His grandparents or whatever did this big important thing. And then you also get another picture of time with him to where like he's on Hyperion and he's younger and in charge, and then he leaves. And then like a whole bunch of years progress because his underling is now in charge of it, and he comes back and he hasn't really aged that much. So that was also like, it was kind of cool because of the time change and what was going on, but it was still like kind of a little bit confusing. But the consoles was just, and at this point, I think I was just so done with the book that I was only half paying attention to the console story and it just the payoff that didn't feel worth it at all. And then the book ends on a big cliffhanger, but I didn't really care about the cliffhanger as much, maybe because I just didn't feel invested at this. But by the end of it, at this point, I guess I'm told what I've seen is that if this one was kind of a struggle for you, the next book would be better because it's more of a linear, actual narrative-driven story. So that kind of gives me hope. I'll see how long it is, and I'll read it eventually. But right now, I just need to wait. I just need to wait for the stink to get off of this confusing mess, I guess you could say. I gave it a 3 out of 5. There was still like, I think the thing about when I do these reflections and rants videos is that there's enough here to like. There's enough. It's more of a letdown, like a disappointment of like, I like so much about this. I think it had so much potential, but man, does this need to be cut out and this needs to be explained. And with these changes, I think it could have been so much better. And books that I either DNF or don't care about or really don't like, I don't give them the time of day because I just don't care. That's not the story with ones like this and like what I did with Picante Monte Cristo. Was like there's enough here that I liked, and like there's sprinkles and glimmers of goodness and hope and like things that I like. But then it's just like, God, that doesn't make sense. Why are you doing this? Why is this going on so long? And it just becomes really frustrating. So that is my unpopular reflections and rant on Hyperion. I saw some other people were having some confusions and issues and flags being raised, and some of those people that I've already read on, I think it was Angela. She actually, I think she gave it this one a 3.5 or a 4, maybe a 4, and then the next one a 5. So I guess if I don't like this one, I'll like the other one better, and then it goes vice versa. It seems that a lot of people who read this one and love it are just disappointed in the next one, and like I guess they are just completely polar opposite stories. So I might actually really like that one. We'll see eventually. But this is if you couldn't tell, I didn't really hold back on these reflections and rant on Hyperion. Yeah, so let me know what you thought of Hyperion if you have read it. Tell me how much I am wrong about all of these things. Explain some of these things. Explain it to me like I am a child. Some of these things, if you can. I'm okay if, I have a lot of unpopular opinions of super popular books, but that's my thoughts and opinions on Hyperion. If you like more of a poetic literary deep character dive story and getting like in the background of something, then you might really like this. And again, the majority of people love this book, but it just wasn't for me. Again, tell me all these things down in the comments and we can chat more there if you're still here.